Darkcast Network, bringing our indie podcasts out of the shadows.
Just before we dive into this week's episode, here's a promo.
Gothendag and fair greetings. I'm borrowing your ears for a second or two to talk about my true crime podcast, Crime Viking. Modern tales of true crime with your host, the Viking. Detailed examinations of cases with the odd rabbit hole thrown in for good measure. Check me out at Crime Viking on TikTok, Instagram and Twitter. Podcast available on Spotify, Apple and all good podcast hosts. Part of the Darkcast Network. Come, join the Oathsworn.
Darkcast Network, indie pods with a dark side.
Welcome to CrimeDivers. I'm Laura.
And I'm Jill.
And welcome to today's episode.
Hello everybody, welcome back, or if you're new here, welcome to our podcast.
Yes, welcome. So Jill, where in the world are we today?
We're in the UK.
Okie dokie. And the title of your case?
His Final Walk Home.
Okie dokie. Shall we dive in?
Yep, let's dive in. So firstly, I'm going to tell you about a place which you'll have heard of because you're British. But
you say that. Have I heard of it?
Yeah, you'll have heard of it. A place called Clapham, which is in southwest London.
Yes, I have heard of that.
Yeah, so Clapham has a village-like atmosphere and its vibrant nightlife attracts residents and visitors from all over the world, and it's actually home to one of the largest Australian communities in London.
Oh, really?
Which I didn't know.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, so Clapham is a very desirable place to live, and it's probably best known for Clapham Common.
Yes, I've heard of Clapham Common.
So this is a large triangular urban park for the parishes of Battersea and Clapham. So it's 220 acres of green space with 3 ponds and a Victorian bandstand, and it's overlooked by large Georgian and Victorian mansions and nearby Clapham Old Town.
Right.
So the common is popular with cyclists, joggers, families out for a walk or a picnic. There's tennis courts and there's other sports are played on the big areas of grass, and it's usually a busy place. Mm-hmm. So at night, Clapham Common is also known as a meeting place for gay men.
All right.
So there's a huge gay community in Clapham. So obviously you see plenty of men taking a walk, holding hands. You know, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But when this case took place, which it wasn't that long ago, but you didn't see that as often as you do now. I think it's more common now because obviously we're moving on.
Forward. Yeah. Totally.
Moving forward. Yeah, that was the right word.
Uh-huh.
So it was a well-known cruising area, in the wooded section. So people would go there at night and meet other men for sex, or maybe kisses, cuddles, rendezvous.
Rendezvous.
I wasn't there, so
yeah, I know. Yeah, you can't say what they did.
Don't know exactly what they were doing, but you get what I mean.
Yes.
But there were people in Clapham who weren't very happy about this area being used as the meeting place. So on the 14th of October 2005, so I said it wasn't that long ago. It's actually.
But in times I think it actually
is that
18
years
years
ago.
Actually quite well, and certainly in terms of obviously the LGBTQ plus community. I don't know if I got that right, but obviously we have evolved a lot in the last sort of good few years. So even back then it probably wasn't as well received as it is obviously now. So
which is really sad.
I know,
isn't it?
It is totally.
Because I was kind of thinking, that wasn't that long ago, but 18 years, and sort of the way that you're saying, how things are moving forward, I suppose that's a long time. Well, 18 years, that's a full-grown adult.
Well, yeah, exactly, totally.
So on the 14th of October 2005, police received a call about a vicious attack on the common. A guy had been out jogging and he saw the attack, so he tried to intervene, but he was threatened by the attackers.
Right, okay.
So he had to like back off, and he called the police.
Well, that's all you can do, isn't it?
Yeah. Officers rushed to the scene, and it was clear to see straight away that the victim had sustained a vicious attack and was in a life-threatening condition. The attackers were nowhere to be seen by now, but the man who called the police told them that there had been 2 males, and they attacking another male,
right?
And they'd been using the most foul, homophobic language while attacking the victim.
Oh God.
So unfortunately, the park was unlit, so it was hard for the witness to give any sort of description. But it was clear from what the witness heard that this attack was purely homophobic.
Yeah.
It wasn't for any other reason except that the attackers were homophobic.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't like this...
There'd been a disagreement
or... It wasn't like this guy had done something to them and
Yeah.
they were beating him at it. It was just the fact that they were homophobic.
Yeah, and I'm assuming he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or
Yeah, we'll get onto that.
Yeah, I'm assuming the attacker had went looking for somebody, basically, just found a victim, and that was it.
Yeah. So we'll get to that though.
Okay,
so the victim was rushed to hospital, but despite the efforts of the paramedics and the hospital staff, he died within hours of getting there. So the autopsy report identified 33 separate areas of injury. These included a swollen brain, broken nose, bruises to his spine and groin, and a crushed larynx. So these injuries were caused just by kicking and punching.
Oh, wow.
No weapons, just their feet and their fists. So you can imagine the level of brutality used in the attack.
Definitely, that sounds awful.
So as the crime scene was being established, members of the community approached officers and told them that they hadn't seen one of their friends, Jody, since the attack had happened. They had been drinking together earlier in the evening, and they actually gave police a glass that Jody had been drinking from, and he was identified by his fingerprints because he was so badly beaten that he was unrecognisable.
Wow.
So the victim was 24-year-old Jody Dobrowski. Jody was born on the 27th of July 1983 in Stroud, Gloucestershire. He was of Polish descent. His mum was called Sherry, but I couldn't find anything about his biological father. But he had a stepdad called Mike and a brother called Jake. So after high school, Jody had attended the University of Wales in Cardiff, where he studied BSc Biomedical Sciences with toxicology, but he actually didn't stay that long and he dropped out. Wasn't it been for him?
No.
So he decided to move to Clapham in 2001, and he found a flat in Lavender Gardens that he shared with 2 flatmates. So he started working in various bars around the area, and at the time of his murder, he had just been promoted to assistant manager in a club called Bar Riza Jongleurs in Camden, which is actually part of a chain of comedy clubs, so it maybe is quite popular, and people are probably listening going, well, she never pronounced that right.
Well, I've never heard of it.
Yeah, but I've never been to that comedy club. I don't know if there's any here. I just know there's a chain of them.
Right, okay.
But yeah, so he'd just been promoted to assistant manager. So I googled to see how close that is, because that's in Camden, so I was like, how far is that away from Clapham? It's only 6 miles, so it's pretty close.
Not far.
So he was happy, he loved his job, he was described as an intelligent, funny, hard-working and beautiful man. His stepdad said that ever since he was little, he had gotten on with everyone. He was described as a gentle giant, young, sweet and handsome. One of the bouncers at the club said, quote, "If you had met this gentleman, you would know him to be a fresh-faced young man who never said a nasty word to anyone, even to drunks who came in off the street. That was just his way. A kind, sweet guy."
Oh, he does sound quite nice.
Yeah, so Jody was gay, but from what I've read, I don't think he had officially came out.
All right, okay.
So I read on findagrave.com that he was a young man still discovering his identity and was facing the difficulty of having to come out.
Right, okay.
So his family knew, but he hadn't actually sat down and told them. They said in a statement after his death that Jody knew he was loved and accepted, and he knew that they knew.
Yeah, but it wasn't
so they all knew.
It just hadn't been talked
Yeah,
about.
they'd all, everybody knew, they accepted him, but they just hadn't had a conversation about it yet.
Okay.
So on Friday the 14th of October 2005, Jody was out with some friends from work celebrating his promotion in Clapham. And by 10:15pm he was ready to go home, so he said bye to his friends and started walking. So he decided to walk through Clapham Common, so I'm assuming it must have been a shortcut to get home. So as he was walking along the common, Jody was approached by these 2 men who automatically assumed that Jody was gay.
Right, okay.
As I said before, the Common was a place where gay men would meet up. So just because Jody was walking through there at night, then they must have thought he's going to meet a man.
Yeah.
You know, which of course does. It's like, well, yeah, you can. So what if he's meeting a man? He can do whatever the hell he likes. Exactly. But these men obviously had a problem with it, and never even stopped to think that this guy was just a guy walking home from a night out. You know,
they'd obviously just set their mind to
this guy's gay.
This guy's gay. We're here to beat somebody up or whatever because for whatever reason we've got a problem with that. So we don't really care. We just that's it. First person we've seen.
Yeah,
you're getting it.
As I said, just because it was a gay place, you know, a place for gay people to meet up.
I'm sure there was just like, you know, people that weren't gay walking through there at times as well. I'm sure it wasn't solely just gay people.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, I mean, there's absolutely no excuse for them beating him up.
No.
But I mean, he could have been a straight man.
Exactly.
So, you've just killed somebody because you thought they were gay. You know, I mean, you shouldn't be killing anybody anyway.
No, exactly.
But
that's obviously been their motive to actually.
So that's what I mean by it was purely homophobia. Yeah. So no matter the reason that Jody was there, no matter his sexuality, these thugs jumped to their own stupid conclusions and started shouting homophobic slurs at him. So they knocked him to the ground and started kicking and punching him. So when the witness that I told you about earlier, when he tried to intervene, one of the men said, and just a warning, there's a homophobic slur in this quote. So this isn't me saying it, this is what. I just thought that I had to say it just to kind of give you an idea what these guys were.
Yeah.
Well, you know anyway, but he said what their reasoning is. So the quote was, "We don't like poofters here, and that's why we can kill him if we want." End quote.
Really?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I wanted to say it, because that's them justifying themselves, or they think that they're justifying themselves, saying that we don't like them here, so...
Yeah, we're going to kill them if we want to.
Yeah.
That's awful.
We can kill somebody because we want to kill them, and we're allowed to do that because it has sexuality, basically is what they're saying. It's like, no, you're not allowed to kill anybody.
Well, exactly. We don't live in a lawless, country or world, you know what I mean? There are laws and there are... you don't do things like that to anybody, no matter, like I said, no matter what their sexuality is, what their race is, whatever, there's no excuse for it at the end of the day. And him saying that, I'm sorry, that does not justify it in the slightest. So that's just awful.
It is like that. We can kill him if we want. Well, no.
No, you can't. No, you can't kill anybody. That's not how the world works or should work.
I know, that's just horrendous. So the two men had fled by the time the police and paramedics got there. Jody was unconscious, and officers described him as looking like a bloody, swollen pulp. The crime scene was cordoned off, and officers started looking for any potential evidence straight away. With a huge police presence, a crowd of people started to form to see what was going on, and that's what drew Jody's friends over.
Ah, right, yeah.
I mean, they didn't think, Jody's missing. They just had seen what was going on and obviously knew that Jody probably would have walked that way. So of course they panicked, and that's when they told officers that Jody could have walked through the common on his way home. Yeah. I'm assuming they must have tried to get in contact with Jody first.
Maybe tried to phone him or something.
Yeah. They're probably like, there's something going on in the common. They've tried to phone him or text him, whatever. Yeah. Haven't got a hold of him, so they went to the police and said, "Shit,
our friend. Could be him maybe."
So the police went to tell Jody's family in Gloucestershire, and when his stepdad answered the door and was told that Jody had been attacked, he assumed that there'd just been some problem with some customers at work because, he is working with people who are drinking, and,
of course,
he dealt with drunk people and whatnot.
He probably didn't realise, obviously it was bad that he'd been attacked, but he maybe didn't think it would be as serious as it probably actually was.
But unfortunately, Jody's family arrived at the hospital just a little too late, and he had already passed, and they weren't allowed to see him. Just because basically, probably for the way that he looked, but also because his body was sort of like a crime scene, if you know what I mean. They'd still have to sort of examine him, and they didn't want him touching him, and so...
What a shame.
I know. So the manhunt was on for the two men who had murdered Jody. The witness did his best to describe them, but as it had been so dark, he couldn't give the police much to go on. So he said that both men were white and they had British accents. One was taller than the other, and they both had short hair. So really, nothing to work with. No. Yeah, exactly.
Could be anybody.
We're in Clapham, in London. A lot of them are going to be British, and a lot of people are going to be white. So
exactly, that's not going to, unfortunately.
It's not much to go on at all. So they looked into Jody's life to see, because obviously, they didn't know straight away that this was, they did know it was homophobic because of what the witnesses said, but they still didn't know if Jody knew these men or if there was any other reason.
Yeah, exactly.
So they looked into Jody's life to see if anyone he knew had any motive to want him dead. But as I described earlier, he was a really nice guy, he had no enemies. So police soon realised that these two men were strangers and had only attacked Jody because of homophobia. So, I mean, they had gathered, as I said before, they'd gathered a reason anyway, but, you know, they just had to establish.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
If there's anything else that the men might have against them, but as I said,
No.
nothing. So once the news spread that a man had been murdered simply because of his sexuality, other people in the LGBTQ plus community in the area were scared. You know, if these men were just randomly attacking people because they were gay,
So
well, assuming that they were gay, sorry, not even
knowing fully.
It's very likely they could do it again.
Yeah, totally. It could, could have been anybody.
Yeah, because it wasn't like they had a personal issue with Jody. They just saw a man, assumed he was gay, and murdered him.
Yeah,
So
totally.
no one was safe.
No.
Not even straight men either.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Because they could, as I said before, a straight man could have just been walking home and they were assumed that they're gay, so nobody was safe. So of course the pressure was on for the police to find these murderers before they struck again. So they appealed to the public, urging anyone with any information on the killers to come forward, and they also asked anyone who was on the common that night to come forward, just in case there was anything that they could help with. But, you know, there was no CCTV on the common. As I said, it was dark.
Yeah, so not a lot of witnesses probably.
But the police collected footage, didn't know what I was going to say there, from houses nearby that had cameras, plus like buses. There's a railway station nearby, and there's an underground station as well. So, you know, they were just kind of...
see if they were caught on camera elsewhere, maybe.
Yeah, just try to see anything suspicious. But because they didn't know what these men looked like, then there was nothing helpful.
No.
So 4 days after Jody's murder, SIO Nick Skolas, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, his local knowledge of... That's a senior investigating officer, just in case anybody didn't know. I just realised there that I just assumed that everybody knew what that meant. So he had local knowledge of the area, so that played a key part in moving the case forward. So he had served as a police officer in Clapham like years before, so he knew the area well and he knew what the streets were like. And he had worked in Battersea Police Station, which is the one that covers the common.
Right.
And he dealt with another incident. I don't know what happened there, but the attackers, perpetrators, whatever, they'd been in a hostel.
Right.
And he said that it was a grand old house, and it struck him as he walked in what a nice house it had been and how grand it had been at one stage. So basically, he had remembered that hostel because of how grand it had once been, so that it stuck in his head. And he had found it strange that in this street of lovely big grand houses, one of them had been converted into a bail hostel or a refuge for released prisoners. I can't imagine the people in that street would have been too happy about that, to be honest, because, you know, people with big houses like that, maybe.
Well, yeah exactly.
And because of that, he was like, he had people go to that hostel, and then it was like, made a wider line of inquiry to establish what other large houses had now been converted into hostels in the vicinity of the common. He was like, oh, we'll check hostels, you know, you never know. So that just popped into his head about this hostel.
Potentially
and this is going to move the case forward. So Nick Skolas had the impression that because there wasn't much parking near the common, plus it seemed unlikely that they would drive to the common at that time of night, especially to attack someone, that the attackers had been on foot. So that's why they're thinking maybe they live nearby. And because they're big grand houses, it doesn't seem very likely
someone living in that.
Somebody who lived in a big grand house would go and attack somebody. So that's why he's thinking of hostels. So he just thought, well, the attackers had been on foot. They were either walking home, or they could have been walking to a bus stop or a train station. But if they were walking home, then maybe they'd been walking to a hostel. So, as it turned out, Nick's hunch about the hostel was spot on.
Right, well.
So officers went to nearby hostels and found out who was staying in them, and they started questioning everybody. And in one of the hostels, one of the residents told the police that two other residents had came back late on that Friday night of the murder, and they were covered in blood, and they had talked about giving someone a good kicking on the common. So these men were Scott Walker and Thomas Pickford. Scott Walker was still living at the hostel, So they arrested him and gathered evidence for the investigation. His room became a crime scene and was searched thoroughly by forensic officers. His clothing was seized and sent off for forensic examination. The other suspect, Thomas Pickford, wasn't at the hostel as he had been thrown out for taking heroin.
All right.
And his whereabouts was unknown. So police immediately started a manhunt, and they soon found him by sort of looking at everyone he knows, every place he goes.
Yeah.
They tracked him down.
Clearly it wasn't too hard to track down.
No, they found him at an address in Croydon, and he was arrested. So with both suspects in custody, the police started by looking at their previous criminal history. They'd both been in prison and released to the hostel, and that's where they met each other. So they hadn't known each other in prison or whatever, but
right, okay.
they met each other at the hostel. So 2 weeks previously, there had been an attack on a gay man on the common. He had been kicked to the ground and knocked unconscious. And I saw it referenced in articles and on a documentary that these two men, Scott and Thomas, they were the attackers. But I'm not sure if it was later on that the police found out that, or at the time. I'm not quite sure the timeline of that, but it apparently was them that had attacked somebody else. So gay bashing goes way back in time. Back in the 50s, police would actually go out and try and entrap gay men, which is disgusting. But back then, being gay was illegal, but still disgusting.
Oh, of course it is.
So I had to look it up, but being gay was only made legal in England and Wales in 1967.
Oh, wow.
But I was even more surprised that it wasn't legal in Scotland until 1981.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, so in England and Wales, 1967.
Wow.
And all these years, 14 years later.
Yeah, in Scotland.
14 years is massive.
That is a long time.
And in Northern Ireland, 1982.
Oh, wow.
1981 and 1982. And even then, it just thinks, that's only like 40 years ago.
I know.
41 years ago, 42 years ago from 1981.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. Which is a long time ago, but also a short time ago, if you know what I mean. It's like, it's not...
Well, I was born before then. So when I was born, being gay was illegal.
Yeah, right.
Which I wouldn't have known at the time.
Oh, no, of course
it's
not.
never made any difference to me whether people are what their sexuality is. But yeah, I mean, I knew it was illegal at a time.
Yeah.
When as I got older, I knew it was illegal at a time. But I did not know that it was as in Scotland. I didn't know it was as recent as the 80s.
I know, that's crazy, isn't it?
You were born in the 80s.
I know, I was a few years before I was born.
Yeah.
Right enough, yeah.
So yeah, but as I said, even when it was illegal, the police shouldn't have been entrapping them. That's just wrong.
No, totally, like absolutely wrong.
I mean, if something's illegal and they are caught doing it, that's one thing.
Yeah, but
to actually set somebody up,
that's wrong, totally.
Yeah, it's wrong.
But it just shows you, I suppose, what people in the LGBTQ
TQ
plus community have had to fight for. Fight for their equalities and to be treated the same, because they've obviously come from generations where it was illegal, it wasn't really accepted. People have had issues with it, and I mean, still to this day, it's not totally.
Even now, it's still really bad. I mean, we're still nowhere near.
No, I mean, you can see that there has been like strides forwards in it, but there's certainly a long way to go for total equality and
definitely
not having to maybe be like a bit more fearful about things, and so it's to hear that, it's just crazy.
So according to a documentary that I watched called Murder Detective, there's always been a culture of gay bashing, or queer bashing is what somebody called it as well, but I'm not up to speed on what's right and what's wrong really in saying. I mean, if anybody wants to educate me, I'm perfectly, quite happy to be educated. But I will say that, I'm not quite sure what terms are okay to say, what terms are not okay to say. So I thought maybe gay bashing just sounded a bit better than queer bashing, but as I said, tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I can't clarify that one with you. But you can go on the go off what you've kind of read.
Yeah, exactly. So there's always been a culture of gay bashing and oppression towards gay men, and Jody's vicious murder was an extreme example of the many hundreds of homophobic hate crimes that were taking place across Britain at that time. And that's 2005.
I know.
I mean, there's still obviously homophobic hate crimes, but it really does blow my mind
I know.
that
Especially this
But
day
it's the same
and
with
age.
racism and everything as well.
Yeah,
It's
that's
just,
it. I mean, it's
you
all-
know, why is it happening? Why is it still happening? But
I know, that's when you think, you know, in the times that we live in now, that, you know, we should be way further
yeah,
ahead about these things than we actually are in reality. I mean, let's say, you know, there has been a lot of progress, but still clearly
nowhere near enough
No.
is what we need.
Exactly.
So the documentary went on to state that homophobic violence often comes from a very dark place, based on fear of the unknown, based on ignorance, based on stereotypes, but also in some cases it's because the assailants are insecure about their own sexuality. In extreme cases, it may even be because they themselves secretly deep down are gay, and they're using homophobia as a way to convince themselves that they're really straight. Which I knew that I've sort of heard that anyway.
Yeah, totally.
But what I was really surprised at was research in the United States by Professor Henry Adams. They found that 80% of viciously homophobic men are secret, self-loathing, repressed homosexuals. So I was quite surprised that it was such a high
percentage.
because I knew that was a thing, you know, like people who don't want to or can't admit that they're gay, so they take out other gay men. Yeah. I knew that, but 80% of attacks, that's a lot.
That's a very high percent.
They use their homosexuality as a way to deflect suspicion from their own sexuality and to convince themselves that they can't be gay because they bash gay people. So, you know, I can't be gay. I wouldn't do that to gay people because,
exactly.
you know.
Well, there you go.
So that was a high percentage. And I'm not saying that that's the case with these two suspects. I just find it interesting that the percentage was that high. I mean,
interesting fact.
I have no idea about these two, what their reasoning is for being homophobic. I don't know their sexuality. I don't know anything about them. Except that they killed somebody for being gay. So results from the lab came back from the clothing and blood found on Scott Walker's shoes, and that matched that of Jody's. So they still needed to place the men at the scene though. So although the police had looked at the CCTV of the area before, they didn't have suspects now. So now they can look again now that they knew what they looked like, and they can actually
they can see them,
you know, see them. So they had to look to see if they could see any footage of Scott and Thomas. So they had been out drinking, and they were seen on CCTV in a bar, and it was obvious that they had been drinking quite heavily, and then I don't know, they must have been fannying about like drunk people do. So the police could follow their route back to, with the CCTV, they could follow their route sort of on their way back to the hostel. So police also managed to speak to another witness. They saw a lady getting off a bus, and two men had grabbed her arm and made some lewd comments before she managed to get away from them. So she gave a description of what they were wearing and what their behaviour was like. So they're placing them here, they're placing them there. And when police were looking at a map, they could see that from where the men had left that lady who got off the bus, the easiest way to get back to the hostel would have been actually to keep to the main street.
So they diverted on purpose.
To get to the common was actually an unnecessary diversion. So basically, they purposely went that way. So obviously had a reason for making that decision, i.e. they were looking for someone to attack.
Totally.
So it makes it so much worse, because as horrendous as this is, it wasn't like they just happened to be walking through the common.
They actually went searching for somebody.
Exactly. They just didn't, spur of the moment, we're going to beat this guy up because he's gay. They actually went looking for a gay man to beat up.
That's awful.
So as we knew anyway, there was no CCTV at the common, but it was pretty obvious that the two suspects were headed that way after leaving the bar, and then when they got back to the hostel, they were very open about the fact that they had attacked someone. So, the police were confident that they had enough evidence to bring the suspects to trial. So the trial began in early 2006 at the Old Bailey, and it emerged that one of the defendants, Scott Walker, had been on probation at the time of Jody's murder. He had just been released early from prison for attacking his own mum.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
He had pushed his mum against the door, he kicked her, he punched her in the face and broke her nose.
Oh my God.
So if he can do that to his own mum, he can do that to anybody.
That's awful.
That is just... No! I would never do punching or kicking anybody.
No.
But your mum...
I know, I think it always seems much worse when it's like your own family.
Yeah, of course. Like, just your mum, no. I mean, I don't know what kind of relationship he had with his mum.
Obviously not a good one.
But yeah, no, nothing, no.
I know.
So that was Scott. And Thomas Pickford, he's a person who follows people that he hero worships. And when he was arrested, he told the police that he started the attack on Jody just to impress Scott. He wanted Scott to see him as a hard man, just because he thought Scott was a hard man.
Yeah.
So he wanted to prove that he was a hard man as well.
Honestly.
Come on.
Delusional or what? I mean, like, what planet do these people come from? I mean, obviously this planet, but I mean...
I know, there's just...
I have no words for that.
No, we just cannot comprehend stuff like that because we just don't work like that.
No, well, I know we don't have that kind of mindset, and thankfully.
Yeah.
But I just, I have no words really for that. That's just ridiculous.
So both men pled guilty to murder, and this case became a landmark in sentencing around sexual discrimination based on a bill passed 3 years earlier. So this was the first case in which Section 146 of the Criminal Justice Act 2003 was invoked. So it allows for an extended sentence where there's evidence that the perpetrators targeted someone because of their sexual orientation. Mm-hmm. So basically, this was the first time that homophobia was treated as a specific offence.
Right, okay.
A specific hate crime that carried different sentencing.
Right.
So it wasn't just like...
An assault or a murder.
Yeah, it was...
Specifically.
And it wasn't just like... Oh, they killed this person and they just happened to be gay. It was because this person was gay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they got a longer sentence, which I'll tell you about in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
So Scott Walker and Thomas Pickford just didn't seem to give a shit. They knew what was coming. Mm-hmm. They had been briefed that they would be getting a long sentence, but they were just like, shrugged their shoulders, whatever. Mm-hmm. Didn't care. So they were both sentenced to life imprisonment with a recommendation that they serve a minimum of 28 years.
Each?
Yeah. So, of course, they're not going to have it together.
I don't know why I had to clarify that, but yeah.
So that's 28 years minimum, including the reduction for a guilty plea. Because you know how when you plead guilty, you usually get less. So it would have been longer if they had pled not guilty. It would have been longer than that. So if this had happened before the new legislation, then they probably would have only got maybe 15 years.
Right, okay.
So 28 years.
Yeah, no, I mean, what?
That's a massive difference.
Absolutely, and deserved.
Yeah, definitely deserved. I mean, wow, that's just freaking, that's massive from going from 15 years to 28 years.
Yep.
So, yeah.
That's fair enough.
So in 2012, on the anniversary of Jody's death, a bench was installed on the common in his memory. So the police and Lambeth Council wanted to reach out and connect with the LGBTQ plus community, so there was a fundraiser where money was raised to pay for the bench. Aww. So it wasn't in the place where Jody was killed, it was a place on a mound sort of overlooking the cruising area, so that obviously during the day people can sort of sit on the bench and just sort of reflect on Jody and what happened to him. Yeah, so I thought that was nice. And I thought it was nice that the council and the police reached out to the community.
Absolutely.
And wanted to do something. So so they fuckers are freaking... that was bad language.
That was bad language.
But yeah, I'm so glad that they got that, and I'm glad that bill has been passed. Yeah,
totally.
Because homophobia, killing somebody because of their sexuality...
I mean, it's wrong to kill anybody, obviously, but I think when it's specifically about how you choose to live your life, then that's even worse.
Well, you don't even choose to live your life like that.
No.
That's just what you are.
That's who you are, yeah.
That your sexuality is just the way you are. Like,
exactly.
There's nothing you can do about it.
No, you're just a normal person, and you just happen to, obviously, like...
It's who you sleep with. You're getting killed because of who you are spending your time with, who you're having relationships with. And that is disgusting.
It is, totally.
So, there we go. There's my episode for the week, which I thought was actually a bit different because I don't think we haven't done I think we've done cases where people have been gay, but we haven't done one where somebody's been killed specifically because they were gay. Yeah, so something a bit different, which, you know, needs to be heard as well.
Definitely.
You know,
It's to highlight, you know, the issues that sadly have happened and, you know, are still happening to this day, you know.
And still will happen probably for a long time yet.
Totally.
Probably always will.
Yeah.
There'll always be people like that,
Sadly.
unfortunately. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Get in
See you
contact
later.
with us or follow us on our social media. We are on Instagram and Twitter at crime_divers_pod. You can email us at crime_divers_pod@outlook.com. We're on YouTube, and that's Crime Divers Podcast, and TikTok is also Crime Divers Podcast. If you would like to financially support the show, you could go to www.buymeacoffee.com/crimedivers and make a one-off donation. Our Patreon is patreon.com/crimedivers. We have 3 tiers, which is £1, £3 or £5, and you get bonus episodes, early access to episodes, and ad-free episodes.
And if you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe, rate and review.